Now, bringing in Global Affairs Analyst Calvin Dark via Skype from Washington, D.C. in the U.S., as well as development consultant and security expert Kach Ononuju. He joins me in Abuja. Hello, gentlemen, and let me begin with Kach in Abuja there. Why are we having such a high level of protests, many of them deadly across the world?
Yes, I think the protests are very good. It also shows you that populations across the world are now beginning to assert themselves and demand for more from their governments. If you will be following the problem in Hong Kong for a very long time, and that has politely now escalated into halting the economy and having the managers of Hong Kong insisting that the economy is likely to run into a recession. That, for me, is the biggest amongst all the protests across the world, because you actually are protesting towards China. China is now being forced to also keep to its promise that it will be a good manager over Hong Kong. But then, the people are quite apprehensive about what China is going to do, and China knows that the world is watching that. And right now, we are seeing the Hong Kong people insist. Remember, from the issue of a legislation that would have made it possible for whoever commits an offense in Hong Kong to be taken to mainland China for trial. And then suddenly you have that crisis, and it's not stopped. It's now taken to the airports, and has shot the economy in the very wrong foot. And I have seen also in Lebanon, of course, that also you could say the mixture of discontent in regard to the crisis that they've been having since economically. Mr. Hariri, I do not know how he will handle that. Don't also forget the way we are beginning to say, Lebanon is not totally free. It has strings being pulled by those who help it economically. And if it cannot stand up to the economic demand and the expectations of the population, what you're seeing is definitely what you will see.
All right, Kach Ononuju, let me put you on hold. Let me put you on hold, Kach Ononuju. Apologies for the interruption, and move to Calvin Dark, who's in the U.S. So for you, we've seen almost every continent largely affected by this global protest. And then they seem to start small, but then the demands get wider. What's your analysis of the situation?
Well, I think that the main cause is whenever a government, no matter what stage of democracy it may be in, is not responsive to the people, then the people respond, which is the way government and people should work together, because they should represent the people. Now, for these protests that we have just been discussing are happening all around the world, I think that there are two main reasons. The first is, here in the United States, one of the things we always say is you can't be what you can't see. That means that until you see other people in your same situation, dealing with and effectively changing their situation, it's harder for you to do it. And thanks to social media, this has allowed people who are literally on opposite sides of the globe to see other peoples who are fighting against injustice, economic disparity, human rights violations. And when they're able to see it, they're able to be it. So I think social media is one cause. The other cause is this. As some people in our world, heads of state, move against multilateralism, like our president here, but not just him, several other examples, it's a reminder that one of the reasons that countries like the United States need to be active in the world and not just America first is it acts as a deterrent for governments that are trying to do things against the people. And so when the leading governments of the world aren't paying attention, then governments in other parts of the world try as much as they can, and that feeds into this lack of responsiveness from them to the people.
Let me also get your reactions, Calvin, before I move on to our guest here in Nigeria. In the case of Chile and Lebanon now, we've seen the government respond to the protests, saying they will do this and that. But largely the protesters have responded saying it's a little too late on the part of the leaders. Now they say they want them out anyhow. What's the assurance that this political vacuum that these protesters want would give them the change they desire?
Well, this is where I think it's going to take the international community to help and support the people in this case, Chile and Lebanon, as much as they can, because you're right. Sometimes that vacuum of power can be more dangerous than the current situation they're protesting against. I remember I was in Morocco when the Arab Spring began, just next door, almost in Tunisia. And I remember the feeling that the government was very unwilling to take big steps, and every time they were unwilling to take big steps, the protesters took even bigger ones that resulted in the toppling of leadership there and in other places. So that's what I think we're going to have to help these people do, is to make sure that power vacuum doesn't make things worse. All
right, so back to Kach Ononuju in Abuja. I'm sure you've been listening to the analysis from your co-analyst at this point now. But looking at where Africa is concerned now, many say the uprisings actually took root here in Africa. What is the role of Africa in these global protests? Are there any lessons we should learn?
Yes. In Africa, you couldn't say that people are quiet. Take Nigeria, for instance. There is a lot of discontent all over the place. The fact that the economy is not growing at all in Nigeria, it also has a reputation in quite a lot of places. So people do have that unease all across the world. In Africa, you're very likely to see Nigeria lead the demands for a better society. It's no good in Nigeria, and of course, nobody will keep quiet. What we have here is like what I will refer to as piece of the graveyard. And I believe the more you have crunching economic situations, the more you're going to have populations rise for better governance. Of course, you cannot say it's very good in a lot of African countries, Nigeria inclusive. So the more you will have such economic problems, the more you will have people react and demand for a better one. I do not see Nigeria escaping it. Already I see the cauldron boiling up in Nigeria and in quite a lot more places across Africa. You saw the other day in South Africa, the xenophobic protests. Those were pure protests against economic bad times. Never mind that foreigners were being targeted. What that told you was very simple. The local people in South Africa are fed up that the ANC has not been able to meet up to all its promises in regards to its promises regarding economic growth. Economic growth is hampered in a lot of places in Africa, and things are just not proper. So I foresee Africans taking a cue from what they are seeing internationally and also demanding for better conditions here.
Kach Ononuju, thank you very much for your contributions given to us live from where you are in Abuja. And to Calvin Dark, many thanks for your contributions on the program.